Can I fly with a DUI? We're going to answer that question coming up next in a Stuck Mike Avcast video. Today, I have with me again Chris Pezalla from the law offices of Robert Strumor. So, Chris, can we fly with a DUI?
Hi, Carl. Thanks for having me. Well, as you know, I'm both a pilot and an attorney, and so to show that off today, I've got the pilot glasses going. Actually, it's quite sunny here in Daytona Beach. In any event, so your question is, can you fly with a DUI? And the general answer is yes. We do see many pilots flying with DUIs that have occurred throughout their career or before they started their flying career. However, alcohol is a significant concern for the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. And the FAA's concern is not really to punish people for DUIs, but their real concern is whether or not a pilot may have a substance issue that can affect his flying, either his decision-making in the cockpit or more likely would affect other health issues like their sleep or their physical well-being, which will then affect their ability to perform in the cockpit. So this is why the FAA is so concerned with DUIs and alcohol use.
So this is truly one of those questions like, can I fly with a DUI? It depends, right? It depends on a lot of things. We're going to get into that. And by the way, we're taking this from the perspective of somebody who's flying general aviation, not so much career-oriented, but I do a lot of counseling with folks that have DUIs that want to go into a career in aviation. That's another thing that we talk about, and that's over at Aviation Careers Podcast. But we're just talking about right now, can you fly with a DUI, especially somebody in the general aviation world? So what happens as far as this DUI is concerned? What are like reporting requirements and that type of thing, especially for new pilots right now that are thinking about getting into aviation? What are they going to need to do?
Well, certainly. Well, we see a lot of pilots coming into flying general aviation or even later in careers, later in life. So they're not doing it in their teens or 20s, they're doing it in their 30s and 40s. And by that point in life, you've hopefully had some experiences, good and bad. And sometimes a DUI or an arrest may be part of that. So one of the questions you're going to see on the FAA medical application, the fancy Form 8500, is going to be a box that's going to ask about whether or not you've had a DUI, whether or not you've been arrested, and whether or not you've ever had a suspension or a revocation of a driver's license for alcohol or for non-alcoholic reasons.
So when you're filling out this form, let's get a little bit granular because there's a couple things that are somewhat confusing. I've done this, looked at it a bunch of times. There's a box as far as a DUI. It's arrest, convictions, and motor vehicle accidents. That's 18B, and then there's another one called 18W. Can you go over a little bit about those and maybe what the difference is?
Right. Well, so there's a federal law that requires them to make every form as convoluted as possible, and they've achieved that here. Myself and other attorneys have talked to the FAA about this. The process to get the form improved is really complicated, so for now we have to live with it. You're going to see box 18V. This is the one we interact with the most. This is going to be alcohol and also drug-related or anything involving a motor vehicle or motor vehicle suspension. And this box is going to apply regardless of the convictions. If there's even an accusation that you did something involving a motor vehicle with drugs or alcohol, that's going to go into box 18V. I should also mention that box 18 is all of those check boxes, all the ones where you check yes or no. V and W are the last two. The W is for other non-traffic occurrences. So this is things, arrests and convictions for other offenses. And actually, I should specify it's only for convictions in that case. So if you had let's say, an arrest for breaking and entering, only if you were convicted would you check box 18W. But with the DUIs, it doesn't matter if you were convicted, just the fact that you were accused. And so there's some nuance between them.
No, that's interesting. Okay, so that's still a little bit that can be a little bit confusing. So if somebody is concerned about this, what would they do? What would you suggest to somebody, first of all, that is confused by this form and says, "Hey, wait a minute, what do I do?"
Well, the first place you can go is to your AME, your aeromedical examiner. You can call them in advance and tell them, I have this occurrence, and here are the facts. Which box does it go in? Do I check one or both? If you're unsure, it's better to go ahead and check the box because the AME can uncheck the box at the exam. So if you check the box, you fill it out, and then you get there and the AME goes, this really didn't belong in this box, they can go ahead and remove it at that point before the application goes to the FAA. But it's better to ask the question. You don't want to have to come back at some point in the future and say, oops, I forgot to report this.
So when they're filling out this form online, what if you forget to check that box? Let's talk about that.
Right. So the FAA will always take an update from you if you have more information to give. So if you, a few weeks later realize, okay, I missed this box, you can always send them an update to that. It is technically a federal offense to not complete the form correctly, so you do want to make sure it's accurate as possible. But if you've made the mistake, generally they're pretty receptive to corrections. We'll talk a little bit later, I think, about specifically how they deal with DUIs that are not reported.
So as far as reporting the DUIs, something that's a really key point is old DUIs. So there's people that have, like, for instance, they have a DUI, maybe they've reported it, maybe they haven't. What do you do on your future medical? Say you've reported on a past one.
Right. So the question are worded, have you ever? And so, unfortunately, if you have something that requires checking that box, it's going to go with you for the rest of your FAA medical certification career, essentially. That being said, you don't have to rehash it every year. You check the box, and then you put a note previously reported. And personally, I would also, if possible, go ahead and fill in the date or the maybe the month and the year that was previously reported. That way, the FAA can look back. The way they have these files kept is largely in paper. In Oklahoma, it's very outdated. And sometimes, and even the digital copies are very disorganized, and sometimes they forget that you previously reported something. So if you can tell them when you reported it, that's going to help them if they ever need to go back and verify it.
And that's some great advice. Let's talk about reporting. So if I'm somebody, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if it does, you get a DUI. Now what do we do? What happens next?
Right. So obviously, you're going to have a local attorney who's going to work through the court system and the state charges for the DUI. As far as the FAA is concerned, they're going to want a report within 60 days of the event. There is no official form for this. However, the FAA does provide a draft letter that overviews what information you need to put in, and that's available on the FAA's website. And that form needs to be filled out within 60 days of a suspension or a revocation or an arrest or any event that occurred involving a DUI or alcohol in a vehicle.
Okay, any event, arrest, any type of thing.
Yep, anything at all. If you're accused of operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol or drugs, then that's going to require a report.
Okay, understand. So there's a thing, I forget how you can say it. It's like a roadside revocation. Maybe you could explain that. First of all, what is it?
Right. So I posed this question to the FAA last year, and I said, okay, someone gets arrested. Does that require a report then, or do you wait for the court case? And what was interesting is they said in most states, when an officer places someone under arrest for a suspected DUI, their license is actually revoked at that moment, right then and there. And that's considered an administrative action and a suspension. So it falls in the category of reportable, both on the medical form and the 60-day requirement. So the moment you're arrested, if you're arrested at 11:59 tonight, you have 60 days.
Okay, I understand. So now what happens next? I mean, now we've been arrested, we have a DUI. Where, like, say, they throw it out, whatever, it's adjudicated not guilty, whatever. How do we update the FAA, like, on the progress of this whole action that's against us as far as DUI?
Right. So I asked them last year, I talked to the DUI department, I said, what do pilots need to know? And they said, the biggest thing we see is that pilots make an initial 60-day report and they forget to follow up. So the reporting requirement requires any administrative action. That includes all the changes to your case. So let's say you've been arrested one evening for a possible DUI. However that gets resolved, there needs to be at least one more report. So if, let's say you go to court and you win, you prove that it wasn't, or at least the charges get dropped, then that requires a report to the FAA. If you go to court and you lose and your license is suspended, that's a report. And then whenever you get your license back, hopefully in the future, that's also a report. So you may have 3 or more reports depending on how the court case plays out.
And those reporting requirements, again, that 60-day.
60 days after each event. So, 60 days after the arrest, 60 days after it went to court, 60 days after you got your license back.
So can I just report this on my next medical if I'm within that 60 days?
I get that question a lot, and the answer is no. Actually, even if your next medical exam is scheduled for next week, you're still going to do the 60-day report in addition to placing it on your next medical. So both requirements exist independent of each other, and you're going to have to meet both requirements. And it seems silly that you're going to put it on your medical application and then possibly a week later send them a report within 60 days, but that's how they want it done because it goes to different departments.
Wow, this is some good information because that can be quite confusing, I'm sure, for a lot of people as far as reporting is concerned. So we have this, we gave them the 60 days, or we gave them notification within the 60 days of the FAA. We did have our medical, we reported it, et cetera. What happens if when now I've gone to court or whatever, or the charges are dropped, now or found not guilty? What happens now that I have that DUI and I'm not guilty? This is an important point.
Right. So this question I get asked a lot is, well, if it gets knocked down to something lower like reckless driving, or if I defeat it, do I have to report it? And the answer is yes. The fact that you were accused, and a lot of people will say, well, that's not how our legal system works. I was found not guilty. This is double jeopardy. Not really the case, because the FAA is not charging you with a crime or an offense. What they're doing is judging your medical eligibility. And they're allowed to evaluate a very broad range of things, pretty much anything they want to do that. And if they want to infer that you were drinking and driving, even though the state court said you weren't guilty, they are allowed to do that. So it doesn't matter how the outcome goes in court, you're still going to have to report all that, both on the 60-day and on the medical.
So in general, we're talking, and I notice as we're doing this whole conversation, we're talking about your medical, not your pilot certificate. It's your medical. So if this is more with the eligibility to fly, and what about your actual pilot certificate? Is there anything I need to do concerning my pilot certificate?
So your pilot certificate is still good as long as you have met all of the reporting requirements. You may lose your medical, depending on how the FAA evaluates your case, but your pilot certificate is going to be good. Where your pilot certificate comes in trouble is if you are not honest with the FAA. If you lie on a medical application, if you fail to meet the reporting requirements, these are cases where the FAA can now take action against your pilot certificate, all of them, pilot certificates, instructors, even your UAS, small UAS certificate. So being honest is really, really important here to protect your flying certificates, even though you may lose the medical for a time while you resolve the issue.
So one of the important points here is that, has anybody ever lost their pilot certificate because they lied on a medical about a DUI, say?
I don't have any specific cases to that effect, but it is possible, yes.
Okay, all right, I understand. So really, we're talking about your medical, but this will affect your pilot certificate also. Say you have been pulled over for a DUI, okay, and you tell them, well, I'm not going to get tested, whatever way they do the testing, either through blood, which is not as common as doing a blood alcohol content through breathing into a device. Should I refuse to do that?
So a lot of criminal attorneys and a lot of traffic attorneys will advise their clients not to submit to a test if they think they're over the limit. Those attorneys have nuances that they try to take advantage of in the system. That being said, the FAA does not look kindly upon that. If you refuse to blow or refuse to do a blood sample, the FAA is going to assume the worst. They're going to assume that you are a 0.2 or higher, and they're going to assume that you have an alcohol problem. And it's very hard now to go back and convince them that you don't have an alcohol problem. I worked with a client last year, and we had to put him into a program because we had a refusal to blow on a single DUI. And the FAA asked several times, what's the blood alcohol level? And, well, we don't have it. So if you're a pilot and you are getting pulled over, it does not matter how badly the situation is going. Comply with the officer, get a blood alcohol level there, and then if you can get a second test, like a blood test at the police station, get any test you can, even if you're over the limit, and at least we can show where you were. And if you're only a little over the limit, that's going to be a lot easier to work with the FAA than to say, well, I don't know what I was, I didn't bother to take the test.
You know, as far as reporting this, say you have a DUI, and I've seen this happen, by the way, especially with my clients that I help out with their careers. They're like, well, this is so long ago, I probably don't have to worry about it. Can the FAA find out about this? I mean, what if I decide not to report something that's been, 30 years ago?
So I did actually get one of those last year, and somebody called me up and said, "Hey, I forgot to report this." Well, when was it? Oh, 1990. Okay, well, that's interesting. The FAA hasn't found it yet. But normally, the way that the FAA finds DUIs, if you haven't reported it yourself, is that they go to National Driver Register. On the bottom of your aeromedical form or your online form, you'll see a box. I believe you have to check the box and agree that they can search your driver database or your driver data through the National Driver Register. And so what the National Driver Register does is it collects information from all the states about drivers. And it's not collecting everything in your driving record, but it's looking for high-profile items, suspensions, revocations, DUIs, reckless driving, things that would make another state not want to give you a driver's license. And this is to prevent people from state hopping, where you're about to lose your license in one state and you jump into another state. So, for instance, I'm licensed in Florida. I think I'm going to lose my license. I call my relatives in Georgia, say, hey, can I use your address, and become a Florida or a Georgia driver. And with the National Driver Registry, it's a lot harder to do that. That registry also now provides a listing for the FAA, and the FAA can search that. And if a DUI has come up anywhere in the country, they're going to see that, and they do. They check that. And so I do get calls all the time where they said, yeah, the FAA checked it, and I hadn't reported it, and now they know about it.
One of the most important things for a pilot to do when they, when they're starting with a career, obviously, is go back and look at their records. One thing that we would like to do as a pilot, say we're worried and we want to find out what's in our driving record. I want to know. Maybe there's a mistake in there, just because I would just want to see if it's okay. Is there a way that I can do that?
Oh, absolutely. I had the same concern this year. I said, I've never looked at my record. I'm curious what's in it. So I sent a letter to the National Driver Register to get a copy. Turns out there's nothing in there, so not real exciting. But but I feel a lot better having that information, especially because people can also, when they conduct identity theft, sometimes they will get a driver's license in someone else's name in another state. So this is also a good way to check and make sure that somebody hasn't stolen your identity. So the way this works is that you can send a letter to the National Driver Register in Washington, D.C., and there's an address provided. They're going to ask for basic information, your name, your address, obviously, because they have to mail you a letter. They're going to ask for, they also sometimes ask for other stuff like eye color and height. Those items are optional, but they help. Someone with a unique name like mine, they can find pretty quick. But if I was James Jones, and I'm sure that name exists, there must be 20 of them, if not hundreds of them, then it's going to be hard for them to sort out which person you are. So if you've got a date of birth and some identifying information, that makes it easier for them to find your records. And then what they'll do is they will send you a letter saying what they found or did not find. They say that they will get to you within 2 weeks. I didn't believe that. I thought, government agency, I'll do something in 2 weeks. Turns out they actually do. They are really good about it. There's no official form. Like I said, they just want a letter with that information. So that's all I did was I just made a template letter, dropped in my name and my information. And I should mention, it doesn't need to be notarized. They're very picky about that. So you want to get notarized and signed, and it has to go in paper. They don't have any other way. There's no online version. There's no fax. They just need it via paper.
So this National Driver Register, filling out it's not a form, you have this letter, et cetera. And by the way, we should mention right now that below here in the show notes, anything you've seen pop up on the screen as far as any of the forms and all, we have links to that in the show notes. So if you have any questions, you can go down below. And so that makes it a little bit easier for you. So don't forget to do that. Should have mentioned that earlier. So again, the form letter that we're going to have that in the show notes also, just to help you out. So what happens next? I mean, say, okay, let's go worst case scenario. Okay, what if you're denied a medical because of a DUI? Now what?
Right. So I get these messages sometimes where they'll send you a letter and it says you've been denied. Usually it'll say somewhere on the bottom, if you'd like to apply for reconsideration, you have X amount of time. I can tell you that if the situation hasn't changed, the reevaluation doesn't usually go anywhere. So we don't even advise our clients to bother with that. If you've been denied or you think you're going to be denied, you want to work with an AME who specializes in HIMS. So HIMS, HIMS, is the full title is the Human Intervention Motivation Study. Nobody actually uses the full title. That title was designed by the Airline Pilots Association in the 1970s. They wanted to have a program to help professional pilots who are having alcohol or drug issues get back into flying. And this has later been so successful it's been rolled into the general aviation world as well. So if you go to HIMSS AME, and that's available on the FAA's website, who those individuals are, they're not cheap, but they can help you get through the process. They'll put you in a program. Usually monitoring involves a lot of monitoring and checking in with them. It's a bit of a nuisance, but it will get you back into the air.
As a comment, by the way, the HIMSS program is absolutely amazing. I've worked with a lot of AMEs, a lot of folks at the union, and also a lot of folks that are out there flying GA, general aviation, that have used this, and it's terrific. It's a great program, and if you are in this program, believe me, the recidivism is incredibly low. I don't know what the numbers are now, but this going about 20 years ago, it was well over 80%, which is pretty phenomenal, I think. And by the way, something else with the HIMSS, we've been talking about DUI, driving under the influence. Uh, we assume when we're talking about alcohol, but there's more than just alcohol, both on the DUI side and also on the HIMSS study, isn't there?
That's correct. So the most common use for HIMSS after alcohol is drug use. Believe it or not, in the commercial world, we do see some commercial pilots having a positive drug test. It's not huge, but we do see a few. A lot of times they're going through personal problems or other things in the background that are driving that. Also, with the younger pilots, we sometimes see them trying to go through training with Adderall or other study medications. The FAA does not generally approve pilots to fly on Adderall. So if you're a young person looking to get into flying, make sure that any medications you're on are approved before you start flying. And then the other nice thing about HIMSS is that in recent years has been expanded and it covers other things now, including gambling. We had a pilot a few years ago with a gambling problem, and he was missing work because he was out gambling. It was really affecting his personal life and his work life, and we were able to get him through the program and back into work and flying again.
I'm glad you made that point, because uh, you'd be surprised at what HIMSS can do. Going back to what you said about anything concerning attention deficit, that type of thing. One comment, just out of the research I've done, and this is non-scientific. I just went to about 10 different schools, flight schools, and I asked them. These are like 141 schools, large type of university type schools. They said some said 20, as high as 20 and to 10%, as far as the number of people that actually were taking those type of medications that you mentioned. So you're not alone. It's just that realize that you're going to have to go through this process, because I think a lot of people don't realize that, do they?
No, they don't realize that those are going to be on the drug test, or they don't realize that they're not approved. But air carriers do test for them. I, of course, went through law school. Law schools have a huge problem right now with students who have unprescribed or inappropriately prescribed Adderall and other substances because of the amount of pressure associated with law school. That's going to be the excuse I have for my grades, because I didn't use the Adderall. But no, I really did enjoy law school. But we're now seeing a lot of folks coming out of college, and they're so pressured to do well that they're coming into flying and they're bringing those substances with them, and you can't do that. Anything that affects your cognitive abilities is probably going to be something the FAA is going to frown on. So make sure you discuss that with your AME. About a year and a half ago, they expanded the DOT drug test, and now they look for an even broader range of substances. So you shouldn't be taking anything that's not approved by your doctor and by your AME.
Well, this is some great information, and we're speaking with Chris Pezalla with Strumor Law. And there's going to be a lot of questions, I'm sure, after this video. You can comment in the show notes. We will send those along to Chris. Other than that, before we get to some key points, where can they find you if some of these questions come up?
A couple ways to find me. One is to, of course, reach out to Carl. Also, we have a website. It's going to be strumorlaw.com. That's www.strumorlaw.com. That has our contact information, and you can actually reach us if it's an emergency 24 hours a day. So as soon as you get released from the arrest, I guess that'd be a good time to call and get some advice. Otherwise, like I said, you can reach out to Carl, and he can get in touch with me fairly quickly.
So again, down in the show notes, you can check out some of the links that we have, and also some of the resources that you've seen pop up on the screen and some of the websites you've seen. Also, don't forget you can ask the questions down there. But to summarize, Chris, what are some of the key points, the key takeaways from this?
The first one is the obvious one, which is avoid a DUI when you can. DUIs are very expensive, not just to your aviation career, but also to your personal life and to your insurance. It's not worth it. Pay for a taxi, pay for an Uber, and don't be afraid to say I'm not safe to drive. A couple of years ago, I was at a function. I drank more than I expected, and I had to do that. I had to leave my car. It was in a safe spot, and I had somebody drive me home. And the next morning, somebody picked me up, took me back to my car. And I am so glad that I did that and did not try to get home, even though it was just a few miles. They've done studies, and most DUIs occur within only a few miles of people's homes. They think, oh, it's only a half mile, it's only a mile, I can get there. You can't, and the problem is your risk of getting pulled over is much higher because you're so distracted by the substance that we tend to see people run red lights or run stop signs. A lot of DUI stops begin with some other traffic occurrence that may or may not be caused by the substance, so it's not worth it. The second thing, of course, is if something does happen, get all the documentation. You want, even if you don't think it's something that's going to get reported, get all the paperwork, because police departments don't keep the kind of records you'd expect, and you're going to need that information later. So any police reports, keep copies, keep them for life. Anything from the prosecutor's office, that kind of thing.
And of course, if something does happen, definitely seek legal help. Don't try to do this on your own, especially with the FAA. Obviously, you're going to seek legal help as far as the arrest is concerned, but you also will probably need some help with the FAA certification. And of course, people like a Strumor Law can help out there. So this has been great. I guess we should circle back and re-ask the same question again. So, Chris, can I fly if I have a DUI?
Your career's not over. It may be temporarily on hold. So the old all-purpose answer in law school is it depends. And in the short term, it depends. But long term, if you're honest and you seek the help you need, you can get back into the cockpit. Or if you're new and you're coming into this, you can find a way to get into flying. I'll also take a moment to note that there's some types of flying that don't require a medical certificate. Light sport works with just a driver's license. And if you're doing gliders, or if you're doing balloons that are not for hire, those don't even require medical. So if you've got a few recent DUIs and you think, gee, I can't get into flying right now, look at some of those other opportunities, and then get a lawyer and a good AME and go work through the rest of the issues while you're enjoying the gliders or the balloons or some other type of flying.
That's some really good advice, but seek help. That's the biggest thing, and advice from, medical advice, but also advice from an attorney. Well, Chris, this has been awesome. I'm glad you came to talk a little bit about this, and we're probably going to hit you up for some more questions. I can't wait to have you back on, because I'm sure we're going to get a slew of other questions here. I've been talking to Chris Pezalla. Law offices of Strumor Law, and Strumor Law will have down at the bottom. So, Chris, we'll have you back again. I really appreciate your helping out.
Thank you, Carl.
Well, again, I hope you enjoyed this short video we did about can you fly if you have a DUI. It's not a career ender as far as your career as a pilot, both recreationally or as a professional pilot, and just for the reasons we talked about here. All those different things that we talked about, all the references are down in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell so that you're notified every time we have a new video. We're going to do some more of these type of videos. I'd love to get your feedback as to whether you like this, and also what type of questions we should ask our friends here at Strumor Law and Chris Pezalla. Well, we'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.